Look, when we talk about global e-commerce dominance, everyone obsessively studies the Amazon playbook. Efficiency, speed, prime. It's a brilliant machine built for a standardized world. A world with paved roads, reliable postal codes, and citizens holding Visa cards. But that's not most of the world. Here's the thing most business analysts miss. While the West was refining two-day shipping, another giant was quietly writing an entirely different playbook for the other half of the planet. We're talking about Alibaba. Now, before you click away thinking this is just another big tech success story, hear me out. Because Alibaba didn't just enter developing markets like Southeast Asia and Africa. They didn't just show up and turn on a website. They walked into regions plagued by what Western CEOs call infrastructure nightmares. Places where the last mile of delivery might be a dirt path, and where 70% of the population is unbanked. The established global players looked at these markets and saw chaos. They saw risk. They saw impossible barriers. Alibaba looked at the exact same landscape and saw a blank canvas. By 2026, these developing markets account for over 50% of global e-commerce growth. Disposable income in places like Southeast Asia is projected to rise by nearly 20%. That's a massive pile of money on the table that the Western models couldn't figure out how to pick up. So, how did Alibaba do it? How do you build a trillion-dollar digital empire in places where sometimes the electricity doesn't even stay on? You don't just build a store, you have to build the entire town. And the way they did it completely defies traditional business logic. Forget two-day shipping. They were trying to figure out how to deliver a package to a house that doesn't have an address. Forget credit cards. They were selling to people who had never set foot inside a bank. It sounds like a logistical suicide mission. But what Alibaba realized early on, the insight that changed everything, was that the chaos wasn't a barrier. The chaos was their greatest competitive advantage. But only if they could crack a code no one else dared to touch. Okay, we're back. So, Alibaba looks at Southeast Asia, a region with 11 countries, hundreds of languages, and wildly different cultures. The typical Western approach here is what I call Control-C, Control-V. Copy, paste. You take your successful US platform, translate the buttons into Vietnamese or Thai, and hope for the best. And that usually fails miserably. Alibaba knew that developing market isn't a single monolith. It's a massive, complex chessboard. When Alibaba made its big moves into Southeast Asia, largely through acquiring Lazada, they realized translation wasn't enough. They needed deep cultural resonance. Think about it. If you're a Gen Z consumer in the Philippines, you aren't using PayPal. You're living your financial life on local e-wallets like Gcash. If an e-commerce platform doesn't integrate that seamlessly, you don't exist to them. Alibaba integrated it. In Indonesia and Malaysia, they didn't just run generic holiday sales. They built massive, highly specific campaigns around Ramadan. They understood that consumption patterns shift dramatically during religious festivals. What people buy, when they buy it during the day. They weren't trying to be a global brand visiting town. They were trying to be the local shopkeeper who knows your family. While competitors were trying to force Western buying habits on the local populations, Alibaba was using data to mirror local habits back to them. That's the difference between entering a market and becoming part of the culture. Now you might be thinking, okay, great marketing, but how do you actually get the stuff to the people? This is where it gets really interesting. This is the ordeal. In the US, logistics is about shaving seconds off a predictable route. In a place like rural India or the dense urban chaos of Manila, logistics is about solving a daily puzzle. The infrastructure wasn't there. Western-style, massive, centralized warehousing doesn't work when the roads connecting them to the customers are unreliable. So, Alibaba didn't try to build Western infrastructure. They went hyper-local. Instead of relying solely on giant trucks, in Indonesia, they invested heavily in local delivery startups that used motorcycle fleets. Why? Because a motorbike can weave through gridlock traffic in Jakarta 5 times faster than a delivery van. It's agility over brute force. But the real genius move? The Taobao village model. This is fascinating. In rural China, and later adapted philosophically elsewhere, Alibaba didn't just treat rural areas as places to sell things to. They treated them as places to source things from. They empowered micro-entrepreneurs in tiny villages to set up shops on their platforms. Let's do some quick math on this. Imagine a rural village with 100 households. Before e-commerce, their economic output is capped by who they can physically trade with nearby, maybe a few $1,000s a month in total local trade. Alibaba comes in, provides the digital tools and the logistical connections. Suddenly, those villagers are selling handicrafts or agricultural products to Shanghai or Beijing. Today, there are over 7,000 of these Taobao villages. They aren't just consumers, they are engines of rural economic growth. Alibaba didn't just build a delivery route, they built a two-way economic highway. That buys you a level of loyalty that a Prime subscription never could. But the biggest hurdle in developing markets isn't roads, it's trust and money. How do you build an e-commerce empire when a huge chunk of your target market, in some African nations we're talking over half the adult population, doesn't have a traditional bank account? If Amazon requires a credit card, those people are invisible. Alibaba's solution was to bypass the traditional banking system entirely. Enter Alipay, and later their broader fintech strategy with Ant Group. They recognized, way back in the early 2000s, that developing markets were going to leapfrog desktop computers and landlines and go straight to mobile. They built payment systems based on trust between users and merchants, facilitated by the platform, all on a cheap smartphone. They made it possible for a street vendor to accept digital payments via a QR code. By solving the payment issue for the unbanked, they didn't just gain customers, they unlocked entire economies that were previously stuck in cash-only limbo. This created what business nerds call a sticky ecosystem. So here we are, looking toward 2026. The strategy worked. But the game is changing. Again, Alibaba isn't the only player anymore, and the infrastructure gap is closing. So, where does the giant pivot next? 2 areas: the cloud and sustainability. See, they are taking that massive computing power they built to run their e-commerce empire and selling it as smart city solutions. Look at Malaysia. Alibaba Cloud isn't just hosting websites there. They are running traffic management AI to unclog cities like Kuala Lumpur. They aren't just selling products, they are building the operating system for the city itself. And critically, Gen Z. Gen Z in developing markets cares deeply about sustainability. Alibaba knows they can't keep growing using dirty logistics. They are pouring money into green packaging and EV delivery fleets through China. They are adapting, again, before they are forced to. And finally, Emerging Markets 2.0. While everyone fights over Southeast Asia, Alibaba is already looking at the next impossible map: Central Asia, parts of Africa that are still offline. They are betting that the same playbook, local logistics, mobile payments, and digital empowerment, will work in Tashkent just as well as it did in Jakarta. If you use Alibaba's platform to sell your goods, and their system to receive your money, and their logistics to ship it, why would you ever leave? So, what do we learn from the silent giant? If you are building a brand or a business looking beyond your own borders, you can't just use the Western playbook. Here are the 3 takeaways you need to internalize. Number 1, stop translating and start localizing. Don't just change the language on your website, change the mechanism. Does your target market use credit cards, or do they use cash on delivery? If you aren't meeting them where they already are, you've already lost. Number 2, Embrace the chaos as a barrier to entry for others. If a market looks difficult because of infrastructure, don't run away. That difficulty is the moat that will protect you if you can figure out the solution. Number 3, build ecosystems, not just products. Alibaba's success came from cross-pollinating. Commerce fed payments, payments fed logistics, logistics fed cloud computing. Alibaba proved that you don't need a perfect environment to build a massive business. You just need the right pair of glasses to see the opportunity hidden in the mess. Thanks for watching Brand Theory. Let me know in the comments, which developing market do you think is the next big battleground for e-commerce? I'll see you next time.